All right, we are going to have, the next panel is going to look at some of the future skills that we've been talking about this morning and really drawing upon the knowledge and expertise that we have in our consortium. So we have a consortium of organizations that is working with the Future Skills Center. We're thrilled to have them here. I guess I get to introduce you and then you walk on. This is like, we should have like a good sound beat, but imagine the music. So moderating this panel is my colleague and dear friend, Alex Stevens, who's our Director of Programs at the Future Skills Center. We're also joined by, we're also joined by Mike Burt from the Conference Board of Canada, Karen Myers from Blueprint, Mark Patterson from Magnet, and Wendy Cukier from the Diversity Institute. Bios are all on the link tree, but they've all got great ones. So you're in for a real treat today. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Tricia. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back, and welcome to our session on Future Skills in Demand. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue à notre séance sur les compétences futures en demande. We're going to be taking a closer look. We've had the high-level view so far today, and now we're going to be taking a closer look at some specific skills areas that are particularly important for our economy. They're critical and increasingly important as time goes on. And there's some key skills in there, key skill sets there where we have some very significant gaps in Canada, both in terms of the attainment levels of our workforce in those skill areas, as well as the capacity of our education and training systems to deliver them at the scale that they seem to be needed. We want a resilient workforce. It's our answer to the fear that Minister Hadji talked about and the existential threat. I'm glad she used frank terms to talk about our worries in the present moment. And the skills that we're talking about are very much a response are important to responding to the challenges that we have right now. When I say a resilient workforce, I mean we want one where workers have the right skills at the right time in the right place, where they can connect with growth opportunities as long as they are able to bring a broader combination of skills that's increasingly needed, and where skills can give them the mobility and adaptability that they need to weather and thrive even in changes in the labor market that are becoming increasingly disruptive and volatile. So we're going to be focusing on three particular skill sets. We're going to be talking about soft skills. We'll be talking about digital skills, including AI-related skills, and we'll be talking a little bit about green skills as well. And why these specific skill sets? Well, our research shows, our Future Skills Center and our consortium partners and other organizations as well, that we know that soft skills are important, but what's noteworthy is that they're becoming more and more important as time goes on. And we know at the same time that there's a significant mismatch between what employers are looking for in terms of soft skills and what workers appear to be bringing to the workplace. We know AI adoption is rising. We sense that Canadian workplaces are lagging in this area. We know that change is still unpredictable. We don't know exactly what it's going to do, what AI is going to do to our workforce. But it is possible that digital skills are potentially one limiting factor on our capacity to do things like integrate AI into our work and to adopt technology. So very much connected to what Pedro Antunes was talking about in terms of our productivity crisis. And then finally, green skills, which are more and more being embodied into existing jobs. Demand is likely to only grow, that's what we think anyway, and that irrespective of what pattern or what path we take to reduce our carbon footprint. So our panelists here are going to shed some light on these skill sets, which are more and more important than ever. But before that, I was asked by my colleagues at FSC to help set context a little bit, to get everyone on the same footing by offering some very basic definitions about these three types of skills. So it's a complex enough issue that I've been asked to make sense of some of these skills before turning it over to the people who can really help make sense of these skills. And you know, but no familiar, you've heard of these terms before. You might know them under different names. And depending on the context, and especially in terms of soft skills, they can refer to different bundles of skills that overlap and that nevertheless have refer to a common or core set of abilities. For soft skills are my simple definition here. Our simple definition is that they're generic skills that are portable and applicable across many different occupations and sectors. You might know them as social-emotional skills, essential skills, transferable skills, foundational skills, and many others. And of course, many of you are familiar with Employment and Social Development Canada's Skills for Success framework. Examples include collaboration and teamwork, emotional intelligence, communication, problem solving, positive attitudes, adaptability, creativity, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the complete list, and like I said, they're bundled in different definitions of soft skills, but all pointing to the same thing. In terms of digital skills, again, very simple definition. At the simplest level, these are the technical skills you need to operate computers. And as Wendy was pointing out in her digital skills framework that she just presented, there are very varying levels of mastery, everything from operating software like Microsoft Office to more advanced digital skills. And we've begun to think of digital literacy in much the same way as we've traditionally viewed the role of basic literacy or numeracy. So it has arrived at that kind of level. We think about it in the same terms as we've traditionally thought about literacy. And finally, green skills are the skills related to the promotion and implementation of environmentally sustainable practices that we need for the transition to a low-carbon economy. So those also range from foundational to advanced competencies. And they include things, and again, it's not an exhaustive list, but they include things like understanding the applications of concepts like climate change, environmental policies and guidelines, sustainable value chains, energy and waste management, and carbon footprint accounting. Now, all these skills are obviously interdependent and mutually reinforcing, and all interacting in different ways with technical job-specific skills, and we'll be getting into that a little bit during our session today. So we're going to be exploring these skill sets and look at what they are, where the critical gaps may exist here in Canada, and why building systems that can effectively help workers to acquire these skills is so important in responding to our immediate challenges and long-term goals as a country. So to do this, we've brought together thought leaders from FSC's consortium. We've got Dr. Wendy Cukier, who is a professor of entrepreneurship and innovation and the founder and academic director of the Diversity Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University. We have Mark Patterson. I'm going from my right to the left here. Mark Patterson, who's creator and executive director of Magnet, also based out of Toronto Metropolitan University. He and his team focus on how technology and digital tools can connect people to opportunities and drive workforce innovation. I've got Karen Myers, President and CEO of Blueprint, who specializes in research and evaluation and turning evidence into practical solutions to drive better skills and workforce policy. And finally here, Michael Burt, Vice President of the Conference Board of Canada, who leads research on Canada's economy, skills, and labor market trends, among other things. So I'm just going to move over here now. So the format, very quickly for our session here, is I've got a few questions I'm going to ask for our panelists to start off with. Each will have about 5 minutes to have their opening remarks. We're going to keep the conversation engaging and entertaining and interesting and the timekeeping brutal. We are going to start with, I'm going to start with Wendy. I'm just going to find my notes here. So we're going to start with Wendy. So we're talking about soft skills, green skills, and digital and AI-related skills. And maybe we can start about talking about why they're important to employers. So do you want to lead us off on that, Wendy, and then we'll go down the line here, and then we'll come back to some of the issues or themes that you're raising.
Sure, and I think some of the key points were raised previously around how important it is to differentiate between occupations and professions. versus skills versus tools, for instance, and how credentials don't necessarily relate to skills. We need to address that. But from my point of view, I think the starting point, and this goes back as well to the idea that we need a combination and variety and diversity in the workforce. I actually think the ESDC Skills for Success framework remains pretty powerful as a starting point at least. And of course we can tweak some things in it, but I'll just, how many people in the room work with the Skills for Success framework? So some, but not all. So just to remind folks of how that, it's been around for a long time. It used to be essential skills, but the reading, writing, arithmetic piece, which is something that is fairly tangible and measurable, and we know that from PIAC and so on. So those basic skills are things that most people need in most jobs. The level of literacy that they may need, the level of communication skills may vary, but I think we can mostly agree that most jobs require people who can read and can write and can add, subtract, and so on. So to me, that's fairly foundational. And then we've got digital skills, and I think that one of the things we might want to think about is, is digital enough? Because as you mentioned, Greene skills are becoming increasingly important. There are different priorities, but, as the world is burning, I think most people would recognize that we need to take environmental issues seriously. So I'd kind of put them in the same category where, and I mentioned this earlier, where we're talking about a basic level of green literacy, like everybody has a part to play, needs to know basic stuff. In the same way with digital literacy, everyone needs to understand basic tools, and increasingly AI factors into that. But then there are specialized deep green skills, deep digital skills. There are occupational specific skills. If you're a tool and die maker, there's different digital technology skills you need, a writer. And then there's the skills in between to how you match the technology to the applications. And that's where knowledge of the technology is necessary but insufficient. Right? Because driving adoption means you need to understand the technology, but you need to understand how organizations operate. You have to understand human behavior. You have to understand how the technology will actually help achieve goals. So I think we have to be more nuanced in our discussion of digital skills and recognize that digital skills alone are insufficient to drive change. And then you mentioned soft skills. Just for the record, I hate that term because the soft skills are actually hard. I say that from experience. And there we're talking about things like communication and collaboration, and you'll see increasingly those factor in every kind of job, and someone might say, well, a plumber has to fix the pipes, but plumbers have to work with clients. Very often they're managing businesses. Very often they have to navigate digital tools as well. So there's almost no occupation, I would argue, where someone is working entirely on their own and doesn't need some measure of collaboration and communication skills, although again, the depth varies with the area. Problem solving used to be critical thinking. I think more important than ever before, but it's an area that's hard to measure and hard to, there are critical thinking tests. I administer them all the time to the students, but how do you actually improve people's critical skills or problem solving skills? You can only do it in context, right? It's not something academic, it's something experiential. And then the other skills, and again, I think in the current environment, these should be at the center. And those are the skills around creativity and adaptability, which are core to entrepreneurship and innovation. So I actually think that framework is incredibly powerful, whether you want to be a doctor, a plumber, or a writer. It's just a matter of the level at which you need the different categories of skills. And then, of course, we have to recognize sectoral differences. So, there's lots of work being done on occupational language training, for instance, for newcomers. So I would say that's a good place to start. And I would also say I can't think of a single job that you can do with one or two of those skills and none of the others.
Sure. Thanks, Wendy. I'm looking at the Slido questions that are coming in and see someone agrees with you already. Does soft skills undersell their importance? So we're going to start calling them hard skills, formerly known as soft skills now. I'm going to turn it over to Mike from the conference board. The conference board has, of course, done a lot of research on skills and in particular soft skills as well. Can you talk a little bit about the evidence that we have about the gaps between soft skills Canadians currently have and the ones that employers are looking for? And if we can dig in a little further, are there particular sectors or occupation where these skills are more important than others or where the gaps are more acute?
Well, I think I can already touch on a couple of the themes here. We actually, in our research, refer to them as social and emotional skills rather than soft skills because we do think there's more to it than soft does imply. But broadly, I'll say, certainly agree with Wendy, every single job requires them to some degree. Obviously, it varies depending on the role, but they underlie so many things. And this is important because when you think about they're critical in people transitioning from one role to another. If you have low soft skills, it's hard for you to move around, basically. An example of that would be during career progression, someone moving into more senior roles from entry-level roles. If they're not getting the opportunity to develop or demonstrate those skills over the course of their career, they're likely to plateau. They're not going to move into those management roles. Typically speaking, more senior roles, management roles require higher levels of social and emotional skills or soft skills. Another example would be when we see disruptions to the labor market, someone loses their job for technology or just a general layoff. Generally speaking, people who have high social and emotional skills have more resilience. They're better able to move from one role to another. They have more options open to them. And so it's an important aspect there as well. And it's also important when you talk about technology adoption. A good example of that would be AI. To use AI effectively, you need judgment, you need critical thinking. And so those are social and emotional skills. And so you need to have those skills if you're going to use technology appropriately and accurately. So you add this all up, and what do we see? Well, we look at where there are gaps in the labor market. Some of the recent research we did, roughly 1/3 of the lost economic value in Canada that comes from skills gaps is tied to social and emotional skills. And 3 of the top 5 skills where there's gaps are social and emotional skills, critical thinking being one of them, active listening being another. So employers want these skills. What are they doing about it? And this is where it gets really interesting. When you talk to employers, they generally say, I know how to train people to use a tool or a technology. I don't know how to train people to have critical thinking skills, to use Wendy's example. And so they really struggle with assessing these skills when they're hiring people in their current workforce. They really struggle with training people for this. They try to hire for it when they're out recruiting. But again, they really struggle with measuring that when somebody's looking for a job. And when you look at the education system, because if people aren't necessarily getting this while they're working, or at least not formally getting it while they're working, maybe they're picking it up indirectly. What are we doing in the post-secondary system? And same sort of thing, you look at the programs, and the majority of them don't deliberately try to instill social and emotional skills in their students. Some of them do, but not all of them. In fact, the majority of them don't. And so if we're not, we're kind of in this situation where we recognize they're important. We really struggle to figure out how to assess them. We really struggle to figure out how to develop them. And individuals as workers, it's really left up to you to figure out, how do I do this? Is it through the social interactions I have? Is it through mentoring that I might pick up from indirectly at different ways. Like it's not, we don't have a good system yet for developing these skills, so.
Thanks, and you certainly pointed to, we're really getting into the intricacies of all these skill sets, and it certainly raises questions not only about supply of skills, but also how they're assessed in the workplace, how they're recognized, how they're valued as well. So there's many layers to our discussion here. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Patterson from Magnet. Mark, Magnet's been running executive boot camps on artificial intelligence. So I'm wondering if you can tell us what specific digital skills Canadians need to be future-proof, and how can we keep workers up to date given how fast the technology is changing? What's Magnet's experience been with this, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with, you may have noticed the question said, what specific digital skills will Canadians need to be future-proof? So my job was to give you guys a list of what you could go study today to make yourselves future-proof. I'm here to tell you there is none. There is no skill that you can go study today that will make you future-proof. What we need to, it was on the screen earlier, is create a culture where we have a growth mindset, an entrepreneurial mindset, adaptability, critical thinking, and curiosity. So you're picking up a theme here. We're talking a lot about the human skills, the soft skills, the socio-emotional skills. There are technical skills you could go and study today, and they will ladder up to other skills that will emerge. But there is no skill today that will teach you or make you future-proof. We need to change the mindsets where I find, and having counseled or coached thousands of post-secondary students, I find a lot of people will come to me and say, you know, I want to do my master's, and I'll say, why? And they'll say, well, it will get me this job. No, you should be thinking about, it will teach you how to learn in a certain way. It will build your skills. It will enable you to learn. It's not a checkbox that's going to just automatically give you a job. And so I think we have a lot of work to do on changing the mindset. We've talked a lot this morning. You know, I was thinking a lot about, kind of woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this panel. But I was thinking a lot about, you know, what would I tell myself when I was 18, knowing what I know now, what would I tell myself? And I kind of did just a couple of notes because I think it's relevant. I would learn the math, the code, and the compute behind AI. I would understand the intersection of how energy, data, and algorithms connect and how they can impact a problem or domain that I'm passionate about. I would then focus on what machines can only simulate or approximate, which is building trust, exercising judgment, and leading with integrity. And then become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Change, adaptability. That is the new reality. It is not, we've been talking about lifelong learning for a long time, but we have not embraced it. And we are not teaching it. And we are all looking for the quick fix or the quick pill that is going to make us future-proof. There is none. So I would learn deeply. I would build things that matter. I would work with people that I trust and that trust me. And when I look around this room, I was commenting earlier, I think there's somebody at every single table in this room that I know and have seen projects you're all working on, and it gives me hope because I think what we all need to do is come together, work together and collaborate and get over ourselves and our own organization and the competition that we have between each other and think about the future. In my opinion, we're going to go through a fairly disruptive period of time, but there's a lot of hope and opportunity as well. You asked me in the discussions across the country, what I'm seeing is what we've been hearing since the beginning, is people are both afraid and excited, all at the same time, depending on what your perspective is. They want a pathway. The pathway is getting involved in what you can do now. You know, if I maybe was better at building things or whatever, I would go into the trades. But it's not an either or. We shouldn't be like, I'm so tired, I'm just gonna say it, of like, now college is saying, ooh, now we have the upper hand on universities, you know, skilled trades, or whatever. We need both. We need to work together. We have lots of challenges. AI is a part of it, but we have other challenges. But AI is going to change every single job in every single sector, including the skilled trades. We actually should be teaching AI literacy to skilled trades now, because it will have that impact. I think the other thing, the only last thing I'll mention, is our intuition is all wrong. Like the speed of change, right? So we talk, anybody think things are changing quickly right now? Right? I guarantee you, all of us, including me, we're underestimating it. And if you can put politics and any other thoughts aside for a moment, the crypto and AI czar that's advising the Trump administration about 6 months ago, he said, people can't wrap their heads around, I'm paraphrasing, people can't wrap their heads around this, but AI will be 1,000,000 times more powerful by the end of the Trump administration than it is today. What does more powerful mean? You can come see me at the break, we could talk about it. But the advancements in algorithms, the advancements in the actual GPUs or chips, and the build out of the data centers, and it's on track. If you're tracking, there are data centers being built just by one company. Meta's building one in Ohio that's 56 square kilometers, has 1.3 million GPUs, and they trained GPT-4 on 25,000 GPUs. People are not aware of what's happening. They're not linked in, and I don't think the problem is, yes, AI will cause disruption, but it will be a failure of collaboration and leadership that we should blame, not the AI. Anyway, I'll end it there.
Well, thanks. I sense that you had more to say, and we'll see if we can come back to it. Thanks for that, Mark. It's great to hear someone bring back lifelong learning as an idea. 10, 15 years ago, it seemed that's all we were talking about, and we thought that was the way of the future. And over that time, we seem to have lost sight of the idea of lifelong learning. So I want to move on now to Karen finally here. And we want to talk a little bit about Blueprint's work and what specifically you've learned about how to assess and build the types of skills that we've been talking about. And going back again to the ever-important question of gaps, what are your thoughts about which gaps need to be addressed the most urgently?
Okay, so I'm going to address this question. I'm going to talk about some of the work that we're doing with many training providers. Several of you are in the room, but I'm also going to talk about a US study that just came out, and I'm going to do so because it really sets the stage for why all of this is important. So there is a US study that just came out in Nature, it's 2025, and it is a massive study that looked at 70 million job transitions through 20 million resumes with 1,000 different occupations. And it provides really robust evidence of something that I think all of us have already been saying on the stage and said earlier today, that people with, and I'm going to call them foundational skills, not soft skills, because I think that really shows the role that they play. So what this study showed is that people with stronger foundational skills, not only do they earn more, they also advance, go further in their careers, and they are better able to adapt to change. So, and you know, I think this is what you said, Mark, really as things become more digital, skills become more human. And we have some good news in terms of the work that we've been doing here in Canada, thanks to investments from the Future Skills Centre and many of you in this room. We're getting a better understanding of how to build foundational skills for people that are facing labor market barriers. So Blueprint is working with a number of organizations that include foundational skills training, some of it's standalone training, some of it's integrated into technical skills training. I'm going to highlight one example here today, and this is a program called In Motion in Momentum. It's designed by the Canadian Career Development Foundation. Serena and Donnelly, I see you here in the room. This is a groundbreaking program, and it has a really, simply put, an employability skills training program for people who are facing employment barriers, but it's not an ordinary program. It has a really unique, maybe call it action learning kind of approach to building skills. And we are in the process of evaluating this program. We're using a random control trial design. So what this means is we're comparing outcomes for people who participate in the program to individuals with similar characteristics but who don't participate in the program. And what we're seeing is that people who participate in Motion in Momentum make gains in some really important foundational skills. So gains in a sense of employment hope, motivation, self-efficacy, problem solving, and emotional intelligence. And these gains are actually associated with employment outcomes. So it is really, I think, such an important breakthrough to be building this evidence around how to create gains in foundational skills and do so in a way that is actually recognized by employers. So what is interesting, and I think this is something, Mike, that you said, is that foundational skills matter not just for getting employment, but also how people advance and people's resilience to and ability to adapt to change. And I think this has some pretty significant implications as a country for how we think about how to upskill and reskill people who are already working. And I think this is where things get challenging. Because people learn technical skills better if they have stronger foundational skills. And when we go about to do reskilling, many people have not done very much learning in the last while and may have gaps in their foundational skills. But yet when we go to do reskilling, these programs often don't actually include any foundational skills training in them. And part of that's because we're trying to move fast, right? And rightfully so. We want to help people who are mid-career workers get the new skills they need as fast as possible. Speed is important. But I think this creates some challenges and may be part of why we're really still learning what works to do reskilling, right? The results tend not to be as strong in reskilling programs as they do in earlier career employment programs. And so I think one of the things we need to think more closely about is how do we build in some of those foundational skills? How do we ensure that we're doing things that foster people's networks, sense of professional identity? How do we build that into the training? And that can help us with, I think, a pretty important Canadian statistic. There's a study by Renee Morissette, who is a researcher at Statistics Canada. He and his colleagues found that in Canada, 6 out of 7 workers who have been laid off and who fall in that 30 to 50 roughly age category actually do nothing in their first year. So they do not take training, they do not move for employment, and they do not restart a new job. So this is alarming. This is something that we really need to change. And so thinking about what kinds of training programs, I think thinking about the role that those foundational skills can play may be a way to help us think about how we can start to close that gap. And I think just some important considerations for how we do reskilling in Canada.
We're going to talk a little bit about the how that you just mentioned. I would like to mention we've got, Karen mentioned people, Don Lee and Serena from Canadian Career Development Foundation who run the In Motion Momentum program. We have many other partners of ours here today, and so as you circulate around and get to meet people, by all means, come and hear about some of the programs that we're supporting across the country. Thanks for that, Karen. I think you pointed, and we've coming back to this a few times about how foundational skills or whatever you want to call them are interdependent with other skill sets, and it's not, you can't just train one set of skills with another, and I think that's something that most people, I don't think it occurs to them. So it's an important thing to talk about in planning. So we're going to do another quick round of questions. Maybe I'll give people a couple of minutes just for a quick take, and it's a really easy question. So where should we be investing today to ensure the right skills are available where and when they're needed by workers and learners, by employers, and by our country? So you have 2 minutes each to solve all of our skill problems in Canada here. So this is a little bit more about the how do we do this. Who wants to go first? Who can, or I'll pick on someone first.
I can go first. I'll be quick. At Magnet, we think a lot. So we have a fair number of projects that we've worked on and over the years. But we have two main kind of categories that we think about things. So work integrated learning is a big part of the work we do, but also the flip side, learning integrated work. And I think it's programs around those two components, and we could get into a lot of detail, but that would take more than 2 minutes. But I think that's where we should be investing. We've certainly seen significant impacts and evidence of the student work placement program and helping students transition. I think with youth unemployment and so on now, that's a really important program, and there are many delivery partners here for post-secondary, but I think the learnings, and this was mentioned already, the learnings we have from work integrated learning also apply outside of post-secondary. It can be applied more broadly, and also we can bring more learning into work. And how we do that, well, I'm sure there'll be lots of pilots to test and evaluate and see what works.
Great. Does anyone else want to take on this question?
Thank you. I'll jump in. Maybe I'll touch on a theme that's popped up already several times today, and that's resilience. Like, I think, I'm in the forecasting business, but I think I'll agree with Mark in saying the only constant is change, right? And so how do you address that? That's through building resilience. And we've talked already about lifelong learning today, Karen, your remarks, people, if it's 20 years since you were in the formal education system, some of those skills probably have atrophied over that period of time, right? And so how do you make sure you keep those up over the course of your career? So I think that's part of it for people who are mid-career. For people who are actively in the formal education system, a big part of that is about understanding what should I be taking and how do I communicate what I'm learning to employers, right? We've talked a lot today already about the gaps in the construction and health sector. And I mean, one of the stats I'd like to quote is we need to double the number of nurses we're graduating every year in Canada right now to close the gap that exists in that particular profession, right? So lots of things we can do, and how do we make sure people know that those opportunities are there and help them find those opportunities. In the education system itself, I think it's about speed. If it takes you 5 years to change a program, probably the changes you're making are now irrelevant, right? So how do you adapt much more quickly to what you're seeing in the workforce? And on the employer side, it's about looking beyond the usual suspects. We talk about this in different ways, but it's sometimes it's about not putting barriers into how your recruitment process. I'm only looking for people with this particular credential or this particular profile. Maybe people who have a different background may be able to meet your needs. Sometimes it's how you advertise the job. There's lots of different things you can do, but taking a little bit different approach to how you look for people, I think can really lead to some good outcomes. So I think all the players in the ecosystem have a role in this.
There's a whole question about how do we get all of the actors who need to be involved working together. That's part of this as well, of course. Maybe Karen, your organization is very deeply involved in studying what works and evaluating and harvesting insights from specific interventions about in this area. I'm just wondering what your answer to the same question would be from some perspective of Blueprint that's working very much on the ground with partners on these questions.
So I would say a couple of things. Like, I think we are really building a much better sense of, say, when the Future Skills Center first launched to now around what works. So, and it's really, really important to be building on that. So part of that is, I think we've got to start moving from project-funded training, which is very, very draining, and it takes a lot of expertise to build a good training program, to really understand what employers need, to build those industry relationships. These things happen over periods of years, so we can't start something up and shut it down in 6 months. That just doesn't work. That is not a good use of our time or money. So thinking about what we actually need in terms of infrastructure, right? And thinking about how we can stay agile, but we've got to start building infrastructure in Canada related to skills. So I think that is really, really important. We've got to pay special attention to people who are already in the labor market. The way we do it now, waiting until people are unemployed, that is both financially and psychologically expensive approach to do it. So we've got to be much more proactive. And as part of that, I think we really need to shift from thinking about inputs, activities, and outputs to thinking about outcomes, impacts, and value for money. That is absolutely essential given the size of the challenge that we are facing, our fiscal constraints. We've really got to focus on how we can generate value in the economy and do so in a way that ensures no one is left behind. I think we know what to do. We've just got to put it all together and put it into practice. I also just say, I really agree with Wendy. The Skills for Success framework is brilliant, right? If you think about all the skills that we're talking about here today, they're all captured in the Skills for Success framework. It's something we could be making much more use of. And I think it would help us build our evidence base if we had more consistent skills frameworks as well too. So I think there are a number of features that we want to, as we start thinking about building infrastructure, that we want to pay close attention to. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Karen. Wendy, do you want to take a shot at this question as well?
I guess Michael sort of talked about what I would talk about, which is taking a systems approach and recognizing that we need to ensure that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And also Karen's point about outcomes and Mark's about working together. But what I would argue is that during COVID, we all, as a country, as individuals, and as organizations, did things in days or weeks that no one thought possible, right? And that includes post-secondary institutions, which, as I said, are not often very fast. Then we slid back to the old ways. You know, and whatever you think about the return to work mandates, I happen to think that there are advantages and disadvantages to having workplace flexibility for women, for persons with disabilities, and so on, but you need the accountability frameworks to ensure that they work well. But if we could just commit if we could just commit to driving change in a serious and meaningful way and line up the tools and levers we have. So there is huge fragmentation, there is duplication. Our language training is shameful. I'm sorry, you know, it was the Auditor General in Ontario who said you'd learn more English driving cab than sitting through some of these programs. It's terrible. There are predatory programs where they take doctors and tell them they're going to help them enter the healthcare system and put them in personal support work programs. It's terrible. It's appalling. We have to commit to outcomes, as Karen said, but all of the organizations involved who are funding and supporting these programs have to incentivize responsible behavior, collaboration, and if someone has a good package for AI literacy, we don't need 750 variants, right? We should be replicating and scaling things that work. So I really think we've got a lot of infrastructure. Of course, it can be augmented, but the pieces are not working well together. And people can argue federal, provincial relationships, can't do this, can't do that. But we saw during COVID, we did lots of stuff no one thought we could do. And I think we need to recognize the crisis we're facing now is that on steroids. And we really, really need leadership. And we need to use the tools at our disposal to drive change fast and responsibly.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks for reminding us of the urgency with which we need to deal with some of these issues. That's kind of the end of my questions. We've got some questions from the audience. I'm going to pick a few of these here, and maybe one or two of you can respond to them. You can also feel free to jump in on each other if you want to add anything. Well, don't cut in on each other, but if you want to add something to what one of your colleagues has said, please do so. And feel free to turn these questions on their head as well. So here's the first one. Recognizing that many of the jobs and careers of the near future don't exist yet, how can schools, governments, and employers plan for the required skills? Who wants to take a shot at that question? Is it the right question?
I think, again, I would just go back to we need to be imbuing all of our programs with the adaptability, the resilience mindsets, because we can't predict what will even be 2 years out, to be honest, right now. So I think, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be studying. I use the example of, for example, coding. One could argue, and you know, we're crossing the threshold right now where generative AI is coding better than the top human coders in the world, but it's still a medium through which you learn, right? And coding is still valuable, and you'll still need to have those deep technical skills and domain expertise to drive change in an organization. I think that's where, for the next decade, there's going to be an absolute massive amount of opportunity is at the intersection of domains and kind of deeper technical expertise to solve complex problems. But again, our system should be saying you're not going to take this training and then you're done, right? It should be setting up that this is a constant ongoing. You will be pivoting in your career every 12 months, if not more. You'll need to be learning new skills. It is the new reality, which is why I kind of go back to, you know, work integrated learning and learning integrated work. For an organization to be adaptive, so not just an individual, but for an organization to be adaptive, they are going to have to embrace that, or we have a problem at the organizational level. We won't be competitive. So there's a lot of things we could talk about in that area, but I don't think we're going to sit down and say, we all want to have that exact answer, right? Train for this, do this, and we'll all be set. But that's not the reality. We need to build adaptability.
I would just echo that. I don't think there's another way to think about it. We have to really foster those foundational skills, the analytical skills, the critical thinking skills, the problem-solving skills, right? And the research evidence shows this. These are the foundational skills that help people develop technical skills. So we put those in place and then set that intention that we're going to need to update our technical skills. There's no other way around it. And then we need to make learning a whole lot easier, right? And make sure that people can access opportunities to update technical skills without it taking 4-year degrees.
Just super quickly, and then but the technology that's driving this disruption will also need to be part of the solution. And for anybody who's, we've been spending a lot of time looking at technologies that are emerging around AI mentorship and so on, and there are concerns, to be clear, right, how these tools are designed and deployed and so on. But it's absolutely incredible, like the promise, I won't go into detail, but the promise of completely personalized learning that not only contextualizes your learning to you, but also adapts it to your cognitive ability is incredible. And if you haven't seen that, you can come talk to me, but there are a lot of emerging things that are incredibly exciting. But what I worry about is, again, our systems, we're not studying a lot of these tools. It's hard to find an RCT trial on AI. If you have any, let me know, but on AI mentoring and learning in Canada or the US or a Western country. There's a lot in emerging economies, but we're not really studying that. Why? Is our system resistant? What's happening, right? So.
Well, we've got questions rolling in here at the last moment. We've only got a few minutes left, unfortunately. I think I'm going to turn it over to, well, whoever wants to answer this. Maybe, I think, Wendy, maybe you can lead us off on this. Someone is asking about Indigenous approaches to education, and they say that Indigenous approaches to education actively and intentionally build social emotional skills. Is anyone looking to learn from those approaches and how they apply more broadly?
I think it's really important, and it's something that comes out when we look at leadership issues. For example, one of the reasons Indigenous people are underrepresented in leadership roles in mainstream organizations for a whole variety of reasons, which I've already talked about. But also work we did with the Canadian Council of Indigenous Business showed that a lot of them self-select out because the styles of interaction, communication are exploitive and colonial and inconsistent with their values. And it's not that all Indigenous peoples are the same, but I think Indigenous ways of learning, Indigenous ways of being are really important to think about when we're looking at skills and training, and they're certainly transferable. The thing that I really wanted to just sneak out before we get kicked off the stage is we've talked a lot about skills, and skills can be measured, defined, and so on, and I would vaguely call that human capital. One of my colleagues, who's an engineer, said accomplishment equals talent, which is kind of skills, plus opportunity, plus resources. And I think it is so incredibly important just to underscore that we can't ignore social capital and the role that it plays, as well as financial capital. You know, my little princess had an 89% average, graduating high school, got to go where she wanted to go to university. 2 parents with advanced degrees, all the money she needed, didn't have to work, place to live, and so on. I met a kid not long ago who had 84%. Single mother, homeless, lived in a shelter, took 3 buses to get to school every day, no post-secondary folks in her family, and yet she managed to get through. If you're trying to assess or compare those 2 kids, who's got the most talent? And I adore my daughter, but we don't take into account how social capital, opportunity, and so on often obscure ability. And so as committed as I am to really pushing the skills agenda we have to recognize that there are a lot of other things that go into engaging people in the very educational process, building the confidence and the resilience to even think of themselves in certain roles and succeed. And we can't lose sight of those things.
Thanks, Wendy. I think we heard some Oscars-type walk-off music there just now. So, and indeed, we are unfortunately at the end of our session. It would have been good to spend hours on this because we can get further and further into this. But I wanted to thank our panelists again for helping us to understand how critical these types of skills are in the present moment, and how challenging it is really to find ways to actually instill these skills and transfer these skills and teach these people skills in the way that our employment systems are set up, the way our education systems are set up. So there's daunting challenges ahead, but hopefully you've drawn some insights from our panelists today. So I wanted to thank one more time Wendy Cukier, Mark Patterson, Karen Myers, and Mike Burt for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you very much.